I tell people I got a blue and red mode. You know, and for the most part, I'm in blue mode. I'm just laid back, cooling like cool water. But then when I would need to get hot and red and excited, I can do that.
And
you know, so it's like a turn on, turn off switch.
So you use it to your advantage.
Oh yeah, well, you know, if you always red, then you're gonna burn yourself out.
Yeah.
And if you're always blue, then you're not gonna get anybody excited about you. You know,
it's
so
good
you have to be both.
It's good to have people excited about you and what you're doing, particularly at book signings.
Yeah.
You don't want to be a humdrum because everybody, you know.
I've done book events, not really book signings, but book events where you have like a table of maybe 5 or 6 authors.
Okay.
And I always been the one that would grab people to my table and throw books at them and whatnot and talk my behind off. And then you had other people that just kind of sat there and waited for people to come to their table. And I'm thinking, man, they ain't gonna sell no books. Nobody's gonna know about them. You know, unless,
you gotta be aggressive.
Yeah, unless you already have like a publicity house that's pumping you to, you know, the 30th degree where everybody knows you already and they just line up at your table. Yeah, you got to do the work, man.
I know, I know that as a poet. You know, I know that because I do a lot of signing for Walden Books and some of the other major chains. But as a poet, I know they always tell you, well, poetry doesn't sell. Since I know that, when I come there, I'm pumped in, and I stay. Sometimes I may stay 3, 4, 5 hours to do what I got to do, and I have to be aggressive. I can't sit down behind the table and you know and be cool. I got to be up and aggressive, meeting and greeting people as they come into the store.
Well, yeah, poetry is a red business. And what I mean by that, you have to excite the people. You have to have a name. You know, you can't just be doing, you know, regular word poetry and sitting back and being calm because everybody writes poetry.
You
know, and
everybody and their mama write poetry.
Man, with me being a writer, you would be surprised at how many letters I get from people who write poetry. Everybody does it. You know,
you'd be surprised how many I get having a show.
It's a very easy form. You know, but when you start getting into the longer novel forms, you know, that's when you start factoring a lot of people out because they can't keep the concentration of a book for 300-400 pages. But yeah, with poetry, that's definitely a red business. You have to have a name. You know, Maya Angelou can sell her poetry.
Personality driven.
Yeah, you got to. It's like a name business. But you know, when you go back to the 60s and 70s, you had poetry houses. They were there then.
Gil.
But now, to really sell it now, you're competing with so many other things. I mean, if you look at rap music and the African American, they're all doing poetry to music.
Right, that's what it is.
That's kind of smashing all the poets because now they have poets that have albums out, which all of this is poetry.
Well, yeah, I'm doing one of them. CD.
See that?
Yeah. But it takes that. I mean, I think particularly poetry is meant to be read aloud, you know. And that's just one genre of literature, but there are many genres. Now, how'd you get into writing, you know, as you do now, with the books and all? You're a poet also.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be putting out an entire book next year called Explosion. Black Books and Publishing, the New Renaissance of the 90s, a personal journey from Omar Tyree, in which I go into the entire essence of how I got into writing, you know, how I formed my own company, Mars Productions, and put out my own books. Then how Big Fly Girl got, you know. Actually, I'm going to be trying to make that into a film now.
How big was Fly Girl?
And then the next thing with, you know, getting the contract from Simon & Schuster, and then going on these tours, you know, that authors get to go on, and then the entire marketing and strategy game, and then this entire flux of, you know, what's going on with black books now, these relationship books, of course, starting with Terry McMillan, and then the whole thing of black men not reading fiction, so I'm basically writing books for women because the brothers aren't interested in fiction, and then this whole thing of artists being trapped inside this artistic cage because they're used to you doing one type of book and they only want you to do that type of book, and they lock you interested in doing something new or not. You know, and then this whole thing of what do you do in the future? You know, they keep saying that renaissances, they explode and then they fade away. You know, but I have plans for the future. And so this book, Explosion, I'm going to talk about the entire deal.
Okay. I want to get back to that. But first I want to talk about how big was Fly Girl? And how did Fly Girl happen for you? Well,
Fly Girl for me was basically a time book. You know, I grew up in the 1980s and I noticed the change in the early 80s versus the late 80s. You know, in the early 80s, everybody was outside. Black kids took over the entire American community with the breakdancing and the graffiti and all our outfits and our slang, and we just took over America. And then white kids started following what we were doing, and then their parents called them the Generation X because they didn't know where they were getting it from. They were getting it from us. And then what happened was that the black community got so caught up, young community, got so caught up in this money and this fame and this flair that all of a sudden, drugs have been around for a long time. But all of a sudden, you had black kids that wanted to sell drugs because they wanted to have a BMW, a Cadillac, a Bronco Jeep at age 16, 17, 18.
That's true.
You know, so they can get these fly girls and ride around to Atlantic City or, you know, these
and profile.
And put the jewelry on and the glasses and the fur coats and hat. And so then it got to the point in the late 80s where we had drug dealers with beepers on every corner. You know, and then you get into the stick-up stuff and people robbing and killing each other for drug turf. And then all of a sudden people stopped hanging out in the streets. All of a sudden they didn't want kids going to the older parties. And so it ended up being 21 parties instead of clubs where younger guys can get in. You stopped the house parties because nobody wanted nobody in their house anymore. You know, so I said, wow, this is a dramatic change from the early 80s to the late 80s with all this money thing. And so I had to write a book about it. Of course, when I used a young woman's point of view, there was a song in the 1985, very popular song called Fly Girl from the Boogie Boys. And of course, it made sense to me to write about the entire essence of materialism from a woman's point of view because they spend about 5 to 10 more times money than we do on accessories.
Is that why you chose to write the book from a perspective of a female?
Oh, it made sense. It's just like that first poem, generally, you're writing a love poem. You know, for the most of us, that first poem, it was some woman that you were just head over heels for, and you sat down and said, oh, I like the way your curves twirl and your head is, you know, that kind of, and you just went from there. And so this first book, no, actually it was my second book, Fly Girl, was about the women that, of course, I was attracted to, but I wasn't a fly guy myself. I was a thinking guy, a good guy. I wasn't into selling drugs and being out there. And so I wrote about one of the women that I couldn't have. You know,
good guys were nerds, though, when I was coming up. If you was a good guy, you know, the good guys lose.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed.
Because they say, well, he's nice, but he's too good.
I was one of those good guys, smart, you know, so I couldn't get the fly girls. So, of course, when you can't get them, you write about them. So that